Happy holidays unto you. So, Christmas movies are hard, you know, especially in this day and age. They're either so sickeningly sweet as to just make your teeth rot. Like earlier today, I was reading through the names of, you know, some of the original movies the Hallmark Network is running, and I felt like I was getting diabetes, you know, just reading the names. So you either go that direction, or you get the classic overcorrection of them being just so negative and hate-filled that it almost negates the entire purpose. So striking that balance is really, really difficult, and especially when you're tackling a subject as tired as A Christmas Carol. Now, don't get me wrong, we all love A Christmas Carol. We all, I'm sure, have our favorite versions. We have our preferences for Scrooge, you know, and whatnot. But let's not beat around the bush. It's tired. You know, there have been, God knows how. I tried doing an internet search earlier. I gave up at like over 100 different versions of this. Every TV show back in the 80s did a version of it. You know, it's a thing where it, you know, here, one of the theaters around town, they do a version of it every year. And it's a thing that, you know, for as good as it is, and as good as a story as it is, we've become so desensitized to it that new versions or new takes or new tellings are very hard to get through. Every now and then you get a really good one, but most of the time people just kind of dismiss it. Or maybe I do. Maybe that's just me. I say all that because I want to stress just how much I really enjoyed this little film. This very sweet, very picturesque telling of the story of the writing of A Christmas Carol, of Charles Dickens actually trying to write the story, and what all went into it. Now, I'm not a Charles Dickens historian. I should have waited till my mother came down for Christmas, because my mother loves Charles Dickens. She's read everything he's ever written, and she's researched him, so she knows. She'd be able to see this and kind of see what was true and what wasn't. But I'm always fascinated by those stories, and I say this, I'm going to put big quotes around this, okay? I'm not trying to make myself sound like I'm on the level of Charles Dickens, but as a writer, you know, as someone who has written plays and whatnot, you know, I know from my experience what goes into writing the plays, where you hear a name, or you know, if somebody says something and you like remember it and take it and write it down for a character, or your inspiration was over here, or you remember this person from over there, and how all that came together to kind of form the finished product. And it's interesting to kind of see, even in a fictionalized version, again, because I don't know how accurate this is, just what might have been the circumstances, the people, the life issues that the author of A Christmas Carol would have gone through to create that story. And it's really neat to watch him go through it. I also really like stories where the characters come alive and are talking to the author, which they do here. Christopher Plummer plays the embodiment of Scrooge, which he's very charming in that kind of evil way. Dan Stevens, I believe, is the name of the young man playing Charles Dickens, and he does an excellent job carrying this movie. One of the things I really liked about it, aside from it just being very heartfelt and kind of walking that line between just heartfelt enough to be give you that Christmassy holiday feeling, and dark, quote unquote, enough to not be just so overly saturated with it. I like that, at least from the story they're telling, that for the most part, you get the feeling that up until a certain point, Dickens wasn't writing a story of redemption. He was writing a story wherein he was basically condemning Scrooge and, wasn't planning on having him, learn the true meaning of Christmas or find the goodness in his heart and all that good stuff. And as such, the story becomes about him, Dickens, realizing how much like Scrooge he is, and learning to sympathize with Scrooge and offer the other side of the story, which I think they could have given that a little bit more screen time, just because that has always been, for my take on The Christmas Carol, that's always been the part that fascinated me the most. And it's always, ironically, the part that I feel they graze over the most, is when they go back to Christmas past and see him as a child and learn about, where he came from. That's always the part that gets cut most in most versions. People who know me have heard this rant before, so, you can skip ahead for anyone listening. I never knew, for the longest time, that Scrooge had a sister. A sister who loved him and would bring him home despite their father's wishes. And their father sent him to the boarding school and all that because his mother died giving birth to him, and he didn't want to see him because it reminded him of his wife and all that. And so he had a sister, someone who loved him. And then when she died, he felt all alone in the world. Versions don't cover that in great detail, because they don't want you to think that this guy, a lot of versions want to simplify it down to, he just hated Christmas. And the complexities of the character of, no, he did. It's not just that he hated Christmas, it's what Christmas represented. He's just a miser. Well, why is he a miser? Why does he hold money so important? Because it's the thing he can control. Anyway, I'm getting off on a, dissertation on Christmas Carol, but in a way, it is important because that's what Charles Dickens comes to realize during the writing of the book, that he can't just have this guy be an irredeemable villain. You've got to know why he does the things he does. Incidentally, and this is the part of the rant that people who know me have heard a dozen times, incidentally, you know which version of A Christmas Carol it was that actually I felt took the time to explain Scrooge's backstory? The Flintstone Christmas Carol, which is absurd for any number of reasons, not the least of which is that the Flintstones would not have celebrated Christmas. They were Jewish. No, Anyway, so I really like that was a huge part of this story, was, him kind of coming to grips with his own issues and, deciding that, he shouldn't just condemn this person for the mistakes they made. You need to try to understand the person for the mistakes they made. And, you want them to be a better person. Well, part of that is learning to forgive them for the mistakes they've made in life. And I think they did a really nice job of it. I think it could have gotten a little bit more screen time, but I think it did a fairly good job of it. Aside from that, I'm not sure quite what to say about this one, in that it aside from kind of the neat aspect of Charles Dickens going through the motions of writing the book and coming up with the characters and the story and the neat things, it's very pat kind of Christmas Carol stuff, not in a bad way. The sets of old London look just like, you would imagine like a set for one of the old Christmas Carol movies to look like. The costuming's gorgeous, and all that. The only thing that kind of got annoying, and it's one of those things where you kind of have to understand, just because it's this type of movie. When they do a movie like this, how the famous author wrote the famous piece, they all like to do this thing where, everywhere the character goes, everywhere the author goes, he hears something that is later going to come up in the book. So all around, you're hearing people use, the most famous lines from the book. If I could work my, many would rather die than go to the workhouses. Well, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Or, there's another one. They'd had a lot of them in the in when they're talking about Marley, that that these people are just saying these famous lines that we of course know are the famous lines, and there's just kind of this really, and that got a little tedious there for a while. It wasn't not bad, not enough to like ruin the movie, but I remember when they did like Shakespeare in Love many years ago, and he's walking through the town and he hears the priest going, "A rose by any other name would smell as sweet," and he does that little author thing of, "Ooh, I remember that." So they did that a lot in here, and it was just very, it got a little irritating. Another person I got to bring up, who I felt this has kind of been an interesting week for kind of young actors, kind of making a real impression. They had this very sweet little Irish girl who was one of his maids, Dickens' maids, who would kind of be the person he bounced the story off of. He read it to her, and she's the first one to kind of say, "Oh, Mr. Tiny Tim cannot die. Mr. Scrooge, he can't do it. He's not a monster." I stayed after to kind of find her name. I believe it's Anna Murphy, so if I'm misquoting that, I'm sorry. This young lady did a really nice job, and did a lot with not a lot of screen time. Did a lot with just a look and just a natural kind of sweetness. I don't know if that's just, I always find Irish girls very sweet, so, so maybe it's just my own bias. But she had just a very, very lovely, lovely center to the film. And one that I wish they would have explored a little bit more. Not a lot, because, the main thing has to be Charles Dickens and his relationship with his father, played by Jonathan Pryce, who is Jonathan Pryce and doing a great job. I would have liked to have seen a little bit less of that, and a little bit more of his relationship and these other people kind of inspiring the book. Because I really liked her, and Miss Anna Murphy. I can't tell how old she is. She can't be very old, but just gives a really understated and very, very sweet performance. And again, she is kind of the Tiny Tim of this film, in that she kind of represents the emotional center of it. Which is funny because in the movie proper, she actually serves as the inspiration for the Ghost of Christmas Past, so that's kind of interesting. I think that's another interesting thing that the film does is, again, I talked right at the beginning there about balance when you're writing a Christmas movie, and that you go too far one way, it's too sickeningly sweet. You go too far the other way, it's too hateful and bitter. And this film strikes a good balance with the characters themselves and the issues they have with one another. No character is all right and all wrong. They start to kind of make you feel like they're going that way in the early goings, but they don't. They show that Charles Dickens had a very complicated relationship with his father, at least according to this, and for what he did or didn't do, and the question of did the mistakes he made, the Pryce characters make, cancel out any good he might have done? Again, paralleling the story of Scrooge. And I just gotta say, I feel like for the most part, they kept the story pretty balanced. They didn't make it, it's all, well, you just need to get over it, because they show that it's a pretty hard thing to get over what happened to him, what happened to Charles Dickens. The only thing I will say, why I say they almost did a good job with the balance, is that never once in this movie, and you don't know what happened after it or before it, did Jonathan Pryce's character ever say, "Hey, I'm sorry for what happened. I'm sorry for the mistakes I made." They always gave you the impression that, okay, just a little bit of side story here, so that for context. So I feel like I'm trying to be very vague, and I don't mean to be. So in flashbacks, we see that Charles Dickens' father, played by Jonathan Pryce, was a debtor. He was constantly borrowing money and not paying it back, and ended up going to debtor's prison. And Charles Dickens, as a young boy, was left alone, had to go to the workhouses, which I know from my research into the Elephant Man just how pleasant the workhouses were. And that informed a lot of his creative voice and all that. So they paint his father as one of these kind of lovable, not so much con men, but a guy who's always trying to get by. He sells autographs from his son. Like, he'll take any letter he wrote where he signed it and rip it off and sell the signature and all that. And and this is where they don't really have the balance as well as they could, is they never once give you a real reason why Charles Dickens should forgive his dad. His dad never says, "Hey, sorry for any of that." He just keeps doing shit. He just keeps mooching off the guy. So in a way, you can kind of see where Charles Dickens is coming from, So I think they were going for the balance. They wanted to show the balance, but I don't think they quite got there as well as they could have. These are nitpicks, generally speaking. These are nitpicks. Nothing ruined my enjoyment of the movie. The movie is very solid, very sweet, and a lovely Christmas film that you don't see much anymore, which is sad. And I think it's a nice return to form. I like these kind of Christmas movies. So this one gets a big recommendation from me. And the only thing I will say is that if you're going to take, it's a good one for families, but I think your kids need to be a little older. They need to be, not so much for the scary imagery, because there is some, which is weird. I find it funny. Going up to the kiosk to get the ticket for this, this thing's rated PG, and this thing popped up of, scary images, don't take the kids. That didn't pop up for the PG-13 Justice League. I found that kind of interesting. But not so much just for the scary imagery, but because I think what they're talking about and the way the film is done, I think it's aimed for an older audience, a little bit junior high, heading into high school kind of thing. I don't know if real little kids are going to get as into it. There's some funny stuff and some big comic bits that, the little kids in the audience were laughing at, but I don't think it's as, slap happy is the best way I can put it, as other, versions of A Christmas Carol have been. And, so I think some of the younger ones may be a little bored during it. But older ones who have, especially if they've been in a production of The Christmas Carol, or they've, been around long enough to have seen various versions, I think they'll get some enjoyment out of it. But little ones, I don't know. It depends on the kid, really. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this one. So I say do yourself a nice holiday favor and check it out. So we are quickly, and I say it sounds weird to think this when there's more months of the year still. There's a month left of the year. But we're very quickly coming to the end of the year for Drive Home Reviews. There's not going to be one next week because I have a show opening, so I gotta be there for that. I might do one the following week if anything comes out. I think there's one film coming out I want to see, but we'll see about that. And after that, my folks arrive for the holidays, and I don't traditionally go to a lot of movies during Christmas itself. So if we do, of course, I'll do a review, but this might be, if not the second to last video I post for the year until I do the best and worst. So if that is the case, let me right now wish everyone a very, very happy holiday season, whatever holiday you and yours observe. I hope whatever it is beautiful and wonderful. Let me thank everyone who has tuned in over the past year to watch these reviews. I really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed them. And of course, I'll be back next year with more of them because I love doing this. So if there's another movie after this one, well, then I'll just say all this again then. But if not, happy holidays to all, and drive safe, and I'll see you at the movies.